when MTV started, there was no 80s. So all of our references, all of our rock and roll references were still, the Ramones were still, the Bee Gees were still, the Beatles were still Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, Foreigner, Journey, all of our references were still from the 70s Queen because there was no 80s yet. When we started, there was no Duran Duran, there was no Stray Cats, there was no Depeche Mode, there was no Madonna, there was no Cyndi Lauper. That was all to come. So all of these references that I'm giving you are, little Greenwich Village bands that were sort of up and happening at that time, which, many of whom, just never continued, but we were sort of on them. Talking Heads was early on. But again, they were from the late 70s too. So it's just interesting because we think of, when I look back at, trivia questions that I was doing in the early 80s, in the early days, it was all about the Beach Boys and stuff like that. There was no Def Leppard yet. It's just interesting how, when we started, there was no 80s yet.
Yeah, and what do you think, how do you think what you started actually influenced what the 80s became?
Well, it's really funny because I think it's a marriage of both. Like, I'm not in the camp of MTV made Duran Duran, for example, because Duran Duran was already happening. They were already moving. I remember playing Duran Duran at my college radio station, so they were already on their way. Like, they had already done their Girls on Film video. They were already on their way. I think that was just a beautiful, beautiful synchronistic meeting. And once, they saw what MTV was becoming, then they saw what they could continue to bring to the table. So there was, especially over in Europe, there was already this sensibility of expressing themselves visually. And, the American artists took a while to catch on. It took a while for Bruce Springsteen to even say he was going to make a video. And his first video that he made, I think it was for The River. He wasn't even in. He was like, okay, send these guys a video, but I'm not going to be in it. Took Bob Dylan a long time. And you can understand, they're like, oh, we don't need that. That's for kids. I'm Bob Dylan, I'm Bruce Springsteen. But eventually everybody came aboard because, it's just a great avenue for promotion, yet a different, cool, fun way to, get your music out there. And as any musician knows, I don't care what era you're in, I don't care if you're talking about back then or today, getting your music from your garage to the world is a whole big thing. That's a whole art, and everybody's always worried about that. They always have been and always will be.